Welcome back to A Good Word, a Baptist Communicators podcast series for Christian communicators. I'm Jim Veneman, and today I'm joined by BCA President-elect Doug Rogers. Doug and our guest today have quite a history together, and I think it'll be fun to have Doug with us as well. But among the benefits of being a part of an organization like BCA is the opportunity we have to grow through our relationship with other members. Today, we're going to have the chance to hear from someone with a long career commitment to electronic media, with a heart for missions and a commitment to the potential of digital media to tell a powerful story. Ron brought about many key firsts and introduced a media strategy that would bring stories to Southern Baptists in a whole new way. Ron's encouragement and vision has had a powerful impact on our convention, and we are very fortunate to have him as our guest today. I'm pretty sure the next few minutes will be a fun ride through some amazing memories, but also will provide ideas that are as relevant now as ever before. So, Ron, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Jim, and Doug. It's good to see you both. And first of all, that is quite the introduction, because I don't know if I've got all of those wonderful accolades that you just have just given me, but I'm honored that you're letting some of us older folks come back in and maybe share some I don't know if it's wisdom or if it's just good stories of how we've been impacted and how we hopefully have done the Lord's work over many years. It's amazing as I look back and I see where God has been involved with my life for a very long time. I go way back to when my parents always had us in church, and my mom was always, it seems, the WMU director, and my dad was always the chairman of the deacons, and of course that meant that we were always in church. And I was part of RAs, and I'll quickly say that RAs, and I believe in missions organizations, by the way, very, very much. RAs really was the first time I felt God lead me to say to me that maybe I have something for you in my kingdom. And I remember we had, in fact, there's a name, Bob Banks, who, by the way, was the RA director and Brotherhood director in Oklahoma, where I was from. And he was my camp director, and he ended up being at the Home Mission Board, the executive vice president that I would get to reconnect many, many years later. But I remember we would have these things called sealed orders, and we would go out and we were told to sit under a tree and find where you couldn't see anybody else, but you would read scripture and you'd be asked to pray by yourself out there in the woods under a tree. And here you are, 8 or 9 years old, and for 15 whole minutes you had to sit there and do this. And it was quite challenging for some of us. But that was the first time that I felt God speak to me to say, I've got something for you special in the kingdom. And so I go way back to those days. Later on, of course, I just became a regular teenager in church and youth group. And of course, then eventually went to Oklahoma State University, where I was in journalism and broadcasting and learning the trade and feeling led to do that. I thought it was fun. It was just fun to do radio. I was in radio and television, and I was a disc jockey, and so I was learning as well as participating, because we had an educational television service inside of the university where we produced things for education. Eventually, I went to a TV station down in Texas, worked a couple of years, came back to Oklahoma State, taught, and worked as a producer, and I got to do some things that went to PBS nationally, and that was fun. And so all of this was going, but the Lord kept working on me. And so I eventually said, and I picked up my family and we moved to Midwestern Seminary in Kansas City so I could find out. I think it was more of an exploratory, find out what it is he wanted me to do. Is it a church position? Am I to be a missionary? What is it, I kept feeling led to do that. So eventually in that 1980, I was 32 years old, 2 kids, no job, just left Oklahoma and went to Midwestern. But 1982 came along and the world sort of changed. That was when video was just starting to be available to, in a consumer way through VHS tape. And I don't know if you remember those days or if Doug's even old enough to remember that, but VHS tape. And so they were looking for people in the denomination to help use this new medium. So I actually had 3 job offers. I was offered a job at Home Mission Board, at the Foreign Mission Board, and the Radio TV Commission, and eventually took the Home Mission Board position. And for 38 years since, I have been involved with electronic communication, starting in those first days. I remember I walked into the office. My first project had nothing to do with video. I was doing film strips and cassette tapes. If you really got really fancy, it was a film strip with a cassette tape, that would narrate it. So anyway, the rest is history. So 38 years, nearly 40 years, I've been involved with electronic communication, and it's been a real blessing. I have a verse of scripture that sort of led my way here, and I see it as my sort of motto verse out of Matthew 10:27. This is the New Living Translation. What I tell you now in the darkness, shout abroad when daylight comes. What I whisper in your ear, shout from the housetops for all to hear. I always felt like we had a message as the church, and that, of course, the gospel message, to shout from the housetops. And if there's a way that we could broadcast that, and I think that's what the calling is, get the word and the message out, and helping the church fulfill its purposes. There's 5 or 6 purposes that we've read about in various books over the years, and we're supposed to be about doing that as communicators in his kingdom. And I also want to put in here, I am a storyteller. And I believe very much, at first there was a discussion about should we have studio cameras and should we have talking heads and that kind of a medium. And I'd already done many things in my previous 10 years of experience that were telling the stories. And if we don't do that, Jesus told stories. He was the one that showed the way on that. And that was his primary way of teaching. And so I think we need to stick to that kind of expression, that is telling the stories, whether it's about missionaries helping poor people in West Virginia or in the south side of Chicago, or if it's evangelism projects that are effective, or what churches that are on mission. Those are the kinds of things we ought to be doing.
Ron, over the years, you have had a lot of different experiences using a lot of different techniques and equipment, and I can only imagine, some of the challenges you faced along the way to get people to come alongside you in your vision for what was about to happen. But I'm wondering if along the way, if there were some changes that were really significant in how you were going about telling the story.
Well, in 38 years, the changes are significant. I'll just go ahead and say it that way. I mean, of course, technology has changed dramatically. We used to carry, just to do a video shoot, I think it was 8 or 9 heavy boxes of lights and cameras and recorders that were even detached from the cameras, and all of these things. And those were the early days. We'd get 3 people usually on a crew just to be able to lug all that stuff around and shoot on the field. And of course, today I can pick up my cell phone and shoot better quality video than I was shooting back then. So technology, of course, it's just been amazing to be a part of that whole thing. Like I said, start with a film strip or a 16 millimeter film that we shot. I did one of my first big projects was Like a Mighty River, which was about the cooperative program. And we went out and told stories of the cooperative program at work, but it was 16 millimeter film, and it was a very different technology than we have today. But beyond the technology, I think that the most dramatic things that we ought to be very much aware of and see at work is that everyone now is their own video guy. You know, we used to be the technical experts, but now, like I said, anybody with a cell phone can shoot a video, and it can have a huge impact. From my cell phone, I can broadcast to the world that has a dramatic increase. Let's think about the person, whoever it was, that was shooting this situation with George Floyd. Did they ever once think that my video that I'm taking of this bad thing that's happening in front of us would impact the world like it has? And only in a matter of 24 to 48 hours did it was just huge. And so the speed of communication is so different. And the biggest issue to me, and the thing we have to face, is the volume of communication. How much is expected? I was talking the other day with a former colleague of mine. He works in the state convention, and he's kind of a one-man band type of guy. And he had already, and of course, with the coronavirus, all of this is the reason for it happening. But he'd already done 200 and some odd projects, and it was only September. And those projects were, of course, everything from Zoom meetings that needed to be edited or deployed in some way, or honest to goodness video stories or things like that. But it's just a volume of communication. We don't have time for it all. And so I think we're sacrificing along the way quality and aesthetic too, is my observation. And now that's an old timer speaking there. We don't really spend the time on quality and doing things really, really well. We take kind of whatever happens. So those are some thoughts I have about the dramatic changes that have happened over the years.
Ron, you've experienced so many things. Wow. I mean, you've done so much. You've been around so many things that were happening. You've seen these monstrous changes. I'm just wondering, and it may be impossible to do this, but I'm wondering if in the midst of all those experiences you've had, is there one moment, is there one particular time that was sort of an aha experience, something that's really had an impact on you?
Mm-hmm. There's thousands of experiences, whether it be just out on a shoot, or really I was more of a manager. We had 4 producers while I was at the Home Mission Board, and part of the time we were at the North American Mission Board, and so I was sort of managing them, but I did have the opportunities to get out in the field. There's one thing I would say to our communicators, my fellow communicators in BCA and other places in the kingdom communication business. And that is that we too are ministers. I remember several times when missionaries that I was covering would say, I haven't spent any more time with any of the people in my particular program area. Let's say it's church planting. I haven't spent as much time with them as I have with you. Our shoots would take 2, maybe 3 days sometimes. And so we would hang out with these people, and we had the opportunity to minister and to pray with and to just know them. And some of those experiences and those relationships carried on well into the future for me. But there's a couple of things. One is I realized when we first started doing a thing called Missions USA Video Magazine, we were wondering if it was being effective. Missions USA Magazine, you may remember, was the print magazine, and we did Missions USA Video Magazine. And we got letters of thanks from people, and they'd say, "Thank you for providing this. It's really good," that kind of thing. But one of those letters came in that really affirmed what we were doing. And it was interesting. This man from a small town in Georgia wrote us, and he said, "Really appreciate all of what you do. We love the quality and everything. But you know what? We were 1,000 or whatever the number was higher in our Annie Armstrong goal this year. And I can tell you why, because now we're seeing what it really is all about. You're showing us what missions is by way of this video. So thank you." And so that was very affirming. And it also taught me a lesson of don't forget to say thanks, and also acknowledge the fact that we do have a story to tell in our missionaries. And another one that is not very positive is that one time we spent several meetings and planning times and actually a lot of time in production. One of the departments in our organization at the Home Mission Board enlisted volunteers and encouraged volunteerism. And they came in one time and said, we need a 30-minute video, and we'd like to tell 4 or 5 stories across the nation of volunteers that are being really effective. So we planned and we spent time, maybe a month in shooting and a month in writing and editing, and put a lot of producer time into it. And of course, there's the big day when they come into the edit room and they see the video for the first time and they say, wow, just what we needed. That's perfect. Wonderful. And I look at them and I say, all right, so how are we going to get this out there? And we're going to, how many copies do we need to make? Well, give us 5 or 7, maybe 8, because whenever somebody calls, we'll send it out to them. And at that moment, which is not a great thing to hear after all that investment of thousands of dollars of travel and going around, that they wanted a few copies in the office. At that point, I started to become a media strategist. And that eventually was my title and my role in North American Mission Board. I started asking the tough questions before we did a project. I started saying, now, how is this going to be deployed? Is this the right way, the right medium even to use? Do you really need a video to do what you're trying to do? All of those things. That did not make me popular with the ministry staff. They didn't want to be questioned. But I went ahead and did it because I felt like that's our stewardship of the resources that we're given was very important. So those are a couple of, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but those are the stories that come to mind. That affirmation story, but also maybe we need to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Ron, today you're talking to primarily BCA members, and BCA is an extremely diverse group. People are doing all kinds of things in communications. So for a group like this, how would you encourage them in their work and in their ministry? I'll just gonna throw these out because I know our time is short. A couple of things that I've read, and they're pretty dated at this point, but I would look back at for quality and for just doing the right things well. There's a fellow that was very instrumental in a quality movement back in the 80s called Edwards Deming. And I read a lot of him. These are secular authors. I read a lot about him, and that he was a systems guy. He said, do the right thing with systems and you'll do better. So I encourage people to look up that name and find some of his disciples and read from them. Also, I remember something that was very impactful for me, and I know he's a bit of a controversial figure because he's a Mormon, and so we Baptists are not supposed to like them. But bottom line is Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Everything from being proactive to talk about strategy and planning, begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind, or do the first things first, and seek first to understand somebody before you're understood. Those things like that come to mind. So look those guys up. But in general, I'm going to say that we need to just remember our calling. And I hope that everyone that's possibly listening to this and maybe is involved with a Christian communication of any sorts is that you feel a really deep sense of calling, that God has put you here for a purpose, and that you go back and you're in the Word, and that you're looking. I appreciate Doug leading us in prayer as we started this. That is very important. Our spiritual lives cannot be sacrificed to our vocational lives, our busyness in the vocation. So slow down and remember to do the best things you can, but keep that spiritual undergirding of God's calling in your life. And
And just remember that, if God's in it and he gives you the strength and the power, that will do great things. There was an illustration given in a book that I was reading the other day about the culture of today is this fast moving stream going the wrong direction. Our culture is becoming more and more anti-church, if you haven't noticed. And we're called to go out into that stream and at least hold the line, if not actually go up against it. And that takes a lot of God's energy, God's power in our lives. And so we need to always be in his word. And we as communicators are so important to that whole process of how we potentially even affect culture. Those are some thoughts. Hope that helps.
Ron, just a moment ago, you mentioned Doug. Doug Rogers has been in the background of everything we've done today. Were it not for him, we would not be listening to this on this day. It wouldn't be happening. But Doug, the two of you have been friends for a long time. And a lot of the things that we just heard, I feel like you were giving a positive nod to because you've experienced some of those same things. I'm just curious if you might have any thoughts or questions for Ron before we wrap this thing up.
Oh, I have lots of things I could say. No, I'm just kidding. No, Ron.
Now let's keep it nice.
Yeah, no, it's all going to be nice.
Okay.
And by the way, Ron mentioned the prayer. That was before we started the program. So if you're racking your brain going, I don't remember a prayer, that was something we do before we start. Ron, your comments about calling and ministry really resonate with me. And I'm so glad you brought that up because often that's what gets a communicator through the tough times is knowing that this is a calling. It's not just a job or a career. And often I've thought and shared with others, as you have, that this is ministry. We are blessed to use tools of communication and storytelling. Those are ministry tools, but first and foremost, it is ministry. And so thank you for pointing that out. In fact, I want to mention related to calling, in 1987, I was a 24-year-old Southwestern Seminary student in a still fairly young communications program at that seminary, looking at a career in communications work, in religious and ministry communications. And in April of 1987, my supervisor encouraged me to be a part of Baptist Communicators, well, BPRA, now BCA. And our first workshop that I attended was in Atlanta, Georgia. And I still remember, this will make you laugh, but the opportunity to go to a workshop led by the legendary Ron Lawson, who was the video producer for Missions USA. Now, I know you laugh at that, but I think there's something to be said about each generation coming along and the people who have established themselves, and then others come along and are mentored by them and invested by them. You mentored me without knowing it back in those days, even though we never worked side by side any in our career. But the Lord opened up doors for us to gather annually as counterparts, and those have been so dear to me with you and many others as we've met every December or January. So I say all that to say, first of all, thank you for the investment you put into a young seminary student's life without even knowing it in the years since then. But I also want to ask you, related to that, talk about the importance of these connections, of mentoring, of investing in the next generation, of gathering, whether it's online or in person like we have. Talk about the value that's had to you and the value that maybe some of our members now can think about in terms of investing in those coming behind us.
Well, if you could see what I'm holding up right now, there's all kinds of notes that I have, and one of them is keep up with the network. On that, how can I encourage? I felt like we were going long, but I just wanted to say, and I thank you for pointing it out, networking is so important. I'm a big believer that it takes the fellowship of the Christian fellowship that we enjoy, and the camaraderie we enjoy, and the support that we give to each other in the various aspects of BCA and our electronic media group that meets, like you were saying, every end of year or first of the year. And it's just been invaluable to know that I'm not in this alone. Sometimes you feel like you're just by yourself. I think even more so today, I think there's a lot of people just, they're the only one that's doing this, or there's only a handful of folks. So do whatever you can to connect up and to have that network of people, pray for each other, know each other. We spent quality time, not only just learning and in sort of the business side of it, but just the personal side of it, of having a meal together. Or I remember Ty Wood and I would always get together and we would just share how our lives were going. And I've been with him several times since then, to have a meal, maybe when I was in Florida or something. And so those are just the kinds of relationships that are so valuable and help me certainly. And I would pray that it would help others to connect up as part of a family of communicators.
And let me ask just one other thought. I don't even know that there's one answer to this, but you mentioned the fast-paced nature. Everyone's a video producer, and that's exactly right. And the now all the varieties of ways that we communicate, and yet the importance of focusing on storytelling in ministry. Do you have one word of advice or just one thought? What is a good way to stay centered on that purpose, on that storytelling, the value of it and the ministry aspect of it, when we do seem to be overwhelmed at times? So I got to get this story on social media. I got to do this. We're tempted to, do shortcuts, like you said, in quality. What is one word that you might say just to encourage somebody to stay focused on that?
You're putting me on the spot. I don't know how you guys are doing it nowadays. I've been retired. I've retired for 2 organizations. So, I'm a little bit out of touch with it. I know that there's a lot of pressure for volume. There seems to be speed and volume. Let's get this out tomorrow. Let's get it out, and lots of it. And my only advice is, and use the influences that you can have in terms, and I never really got to some of the points I wanted to make about strategy. Use the influence you have in your organization to do the right things. And part of that, I have to say, is slow down and be effective with what you do. Volume does not make up, in my opinion, for quality of the storytelling and the things that you're talking about. A lot of it oftentimes turns into talking heads. Let's go out and shoot this interview and come back and put it online. It takes more than that. It takes, spending time. And we've lost that. Does that help us? I don't know, because you still have people up above you, maybe in your particular position, that says we got to do it fast and we got to do it now. And it's got to be, volume, lots of it. And those are the enemies of really doing an effective job. One of the things that comes to my mind, I know Doug Kesey and his group, whenever we were at the North American Mission Board, put together a piece. I think it was after 9/11, and it was about our ministries there. It was the first thing that we saw go viral, but it had been done in a very effective montage way of not only the needs in the city of New York and so forth, but the ministries. That's what I'm remembering. It's been a long time, but it went to 200, 300,000, like within a few days of downloads. And this was even in the early days of that kind of technology being available. And I just saw that that was a quality piece. It was resonating. If we had just thrown it together as a talking head type of thing, I don't think it would have been downloaded. And I don't know if that's the best example, but I do know that people are affected by the commitment of our missionaries, the commitment to God and to their ministry and to their people that they're trying to reach. And if you don't stop and tell that story and listen to that story every once in a while, then we're missing out.
Thank you. Thank you. Very fit words. And Ron, let me say thank you again, not only for your tremendous kingdom impact, but your individual impact on my life. Thank you for all that you mean to us.
That's gratifying. Thanks.
Jim?
Ron, wow, this has been a good time. This has been really good. And I enjoy these last few minutes listening to the two of you talk back and forth. It's just been a very rich moment. So Ron, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks again to Doug for making all this happen. Without him, we definitely would not have met together today. And as always, thanks to all of you for joining us.